creo que deberían estar en el arsenal de todos los ingenieros.
Permite desarrollar nuestra actividad en forma intensa y planificada y con visión de largo plazo. CAI es nuestra institución.
Bueno, muy buenos días. Desde el Centro Argentino de Ingenieros les damos la bienvenida a este nuevo evento de nombramiento de socio honorario. En esta oportunidad, quien recibe esta mención, otorgada por la Comisión Directiva del CAI, es el doctor Philip Williams, a quien le agradecemos que haya aceptado esta distinción. Conversará junto con el presidente del Centro Argentino de Ingenieros, el ingeniero Pablo Bereciartúa, sobre cómo se piensa el desarrollo sustentable desde Silicon Valley, entre otras cosas. Como siempre, este evento está siendo transmitido por YouTube, por el canal del CAI, y es allí donde podrán volver a encontrar esta y las demás charlas realizadas. Compartiré una síntesis de la vida del Dr. Williams para luego dar comienzo al evento. El Dr. Williams es fundador y expresidente de Philip Williams & Associates, una firma de consultoría con sede en San Francisco, California, que en la década de 1970 fue pionera en la integración de la gestión de recursos naturales y la planificación ambiental en la práctica tradicional de ingeniería fluvial y costera. A partir de su campo de investigación original de hidráulica de sedimentos, desarrolló la práctica de la geomorfología aplicada para informar soluciones de gestión adaptativa a largo plazo para sistemas fluviales, estuarinos y costeros. Durante sus 40 años de carrera ha dirigido más de 400 estudios sobre una amplia gama de problemas hidrológicos en el oeste de la costa de Estados Unidos, incluida la modernización de la infraestructura de control de inundaciones urbanas, la restauración de funciones ecológicas en lagunas costeras, la mitigación de los impactos de las presas en los sistemas fluviales y estuarinas, el análisis del cambio climático en la inundación costera, la gestión de las aguas subterráneas y la restauración de las llanuras aluviales. El Dr. Williams también es el fundador y el expresidente de la Red Internacional de Ríos, con sede en Berkeley, California, una ONG dedicada a apoyar a los activistas ciudadanos que trabajan para proteger las comunidades fluviales y los ecosistemas en diferentes países. Con esto le voy a dar la palabra al ingeniero Pablo Bereciartúa para que dé comienzo a este evento, y muchas gracias a todos. Voy a hacer la salvedad que quizás el doctor Philip Williams no tenga cámara. Vamos a ver si ahora sucede o no, pero puede suceder. Vamos a ver.
Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias, Verónica. Es para mí un gran gusto dar inicio a este evento, que como muchos saben es uno de los principales distinciones que el Centro Argentino de Ingenieros otorga, la distinción de socio honorario, y que surge de una decisión unánime del máximo órgano de gobierno del CAI, que es su directorio, y que distingue a personas que hagan aportes sustantivos aquí o en el mundo a la ingeniería, a sus países y en general a la humanidad. Y en esa lista para mí es un gran placer poder presentar y llevar adelante este acto en el cual vamos a incorporar al doctor Philip Williams, el ingeniero Philip Williams, que bueno, es un líder, lo ha sido durante muchos años en algunos de los temas que hoy son principales, y entre ellos incluyo la idea de la sustentabilidad. Así que, como hacemos normalmente en estos casos, ahora seguramente vamos a pasar al inglés, y es con el idioma inglés con el cual vamos a llevar adelante el acto y la conversación. Y para los que nos acompañan, vamos a tener abierto el chat para preguntas o comentarios que seguramente luego de la conversación que mantendré con Philip vamos a atender, y sobre todo él, porque el objetivo de este acto es distinguirlo a él, incorporarlo al Centro Argentino de Ingenieros y también tener la oportunidad, sobre todo en este diálogo, de conocer cómo piensa, cuáles son sus experiencias y cuáles son sus ideas alrededor de algunos de los temas que nos importan. So what I will do right now is to turn into English, and I am very glad to be doing the opening of this event. This event is about naming honorary fellow of the Argentinian Engineering Center to Philip Williams. Philip Williams, for many of us, Phil Williams, is a very distinguished engineer with a very significant career in the profession, in the civil society leadership, but also in the academia. So as I do in this initial part of our event, I will go through the formal naming of him as honorary fellow. And for that, what I do typically is I read the article in our bylaw, which is about honorary fellows. And as I said at the beginning in Spanish, this is one of the highest honors that the Argentinian Engineering Center confers. And this is, our institution is the oldest institution in Argentina. It's a 126-year-old institution. It is the leading institution in engineering for our country. And regarding the honorary fellow, our bylaws, it reads that this will be awarded to people, men and women, in science, engineering, and in any other public endeavor, which have distinguished themselves due to their leadership in their countries or globally, and in regard to their knowledge, and also because of the leadership they have developed in topics that are highly beneficial for humanity, for the country, or for the profession. And a very important part of our bylaw is that this designation is a lifelong designation. It is without any charge, and very significantly, it is decided by unanimity in the highest government board of our institution, which is our directorio, our board. So it is for me a real honor and also a pleasure to be now naming you, Phil, honorary fellow of our institution. I would like also to add on top of this that by doing this, we're identifying people that we believe have ideas and experiences and that convey some of our messages and the way we see that we should be working and also improving our life in this planet. And also it is a way of including you in our extended family, in our institution. And of course, we are doing this digitally right now, but I hope in the future, and I have an image of our main building in Buenos Aires behind me, we have the possibility to have you around here. So let me come back to my former expression that it is for me a real pleasure and really an honor to be naming you. And I'm really glad that you have accepted this awarding as honorary fellow of our institution. Thank you, Phil.
Doctor?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I really very much appreciate this honor. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Phil. So we will go on. We don't see you, but that is not an issue, I think. If you are comfortable with this, we can go on with the second phase of this. So let me begin by asking you, according to your ideas and experiences, what sustainability is about.
Well, I know this has been a topic of your previous speakers of your institution, and I thought I might have a different perspective on actually how you achieve sustainability in a complex resource management issue. And the one that I have been involved in heavily over the last 40 years is river and water resources management in California. My role in this has been as an advisor and consultant to different NGOs, environmental NGOs, government entities and research institutes that have been trying to find out a way to retrofit what is an aging, obsolete infrastructure of water resources management. And I don't know how many people have actually been to California and seen the network of dams and canals that but have completely transformed the river and water systems in California. I don't know if you can show a slide here with a slide that I sent, but I don't know if that's going to work. There we go. Yeah.
It is working, Phil. This is working really well, so go ahead.
Okay. So this water system of a complex of about 30 mega dams that capture runoff from the Sierra Nevada and channel them through the canal system to irrigate what is essentially desert lands in the southern part of the state. This was all planned and constructed in a period from the 1920s to the 1960s. And it was planned at a time when there was no regard to the idea of sustainability, and there was no recognition that in transforming the landscape in this way, there would be huge adverse environmental effects. So, but later, as these adverse effects, these externalities in the system became more and more obvious, there was a growing movement to reevaluate the basis on which this system had been constructed and how it was being managed. And so in the 1990s, a new initiative was established. This was a period when I would say these ideas of sustainability and environmental management were in the ascendant in California and also nationwide. So there was a governmental process set up to examine three key issues in water resources management. One was the allocation of water that had been made, which gave all water for irrigation. Was that a correct decision, or should a portion of that be allocated for the environment? And as a consultant to the Environmental Defense Fund, I was able to articulate a water management plan that essentially reallocated only 10% of the water for environmental uses. And this actually became the basis of an act in Congress called the Miller-Bradley Bill that was passed in 1986 that simply said, okay, we recognize the adverse effects. Now we're going to have to shift some more water to sustain wetlands and fish and wildlife. The second one was looking at how habitats in irrigating and transforming all the lowland land here in the Central Valley of California. We'd lost 98% of the wetland habitats. So trying to develop a program that would allow us to restore those vital parts of the ecosystem as part of overall water management, the second part. And the third part was simply in the original planning of this system, there was absolutely no recognition that the flow of the water from these rivers into the Pacific Ocean created an estuary, which provided a significant natural resource and also a commercial fishery. So reallocating water to sustain estuarine processes was a third part of the initiative. And unfortunately, this became a significant effort in which the state of California and the federal government brought together some of the best thinkers, best academics in resource management to develop a long-range plan. And this was, for anybody's interested in it, it was called the CalFed process, California Federal Government Process. And unfortunately, with the change in administration, with Republican taking over in 2000, the whole effort died. So I want to tell you a little bit about where we were going with this. And let's talk about, well, why, try to understand why it was that it didn't get anywhere. And it hasn't gone anywhere. One of the symptoms of that is right now in California, these reservoirs, which the capacity of all these reservoirs in the state of California can capture all of the runoff. The volume in those reservoirs is big enough to capture all the annual runoff of those rivers. But right now, they're only 20% full. And on the Colorado River, which is an ancillary supply, the reservoirs are also 20% full. And really, there's no real contingency plans for what happens if the drought we're experiencing right now would continue. So that is a symptom of an unsustainable system. If you can get to this dire situation where we're precariously we're running out of water in California. But the second part of it is something that I think has been neglected in discussions about sustainability, which is how vulnerable our systems are, particularly, and introducing the concept of resilience into sustainability planning. The next slide. I don't know if we can pull up the next slide. Here, this is a picture of the Oroville Dam 4 years ago. The Oroville Dam is the largest dam in the water system in California. It's about, the reservoir is about the size of a Salto Grande project in Argentina. And it experienced a moderately sized flood, but lost control of that flood, where causing the spillway to start disintegrating, requiring overflow of a dam crest here, and forcing the evacuation of 180,000 people downstream because of the imminent risk of dam failure. Now, to get into this situation where this infrastructure is so brittle that these kind of things can happen, it has to be integrated into sustainability planning. Because in the management of the water system, you always find that there is assumption that they're always going to be operated perfectly. The systems are always going to be working, and there's no resilience in the system. The effort that that we were engaged in was actually, maybe we can go to the next slide. This illustrates how much of this is the Sacramento Valley, but before 150 years ago, before agricultural development, and the green and the brown show the types of wetlands that existed in the valley, and this is what it's like now. And of course, the flat, rich agricultural floodplain lands was very rich soils, became the basis for, a very valuable agricultural activities here. Rice is grown in this area here, but it illustrates that we've lost 98% of these habitats that sustain fish and wildlife. And fortunately in California, there's been a lot of good research done at particularly at the University of California, Davis, that has demonstrated the linkages between flows, how much water you release from dams, and how the ecosystem responds. And the next slide. This is actually a sort of a conceptual model, simply showing the linkages between flow pulses, the blues, in the natural system, and how different components of the ecosystem respond to these flood pulses. And the interesting thing here is, you can see down at the bottom, this blue is the what used to exist in California. These are the natural flows that used to exist. But now, with the construction of these dams, the flows have been completely flatlined. And so the flows have been diminished, and you no longer have any of these flood pulses. So what we were trying to do is institute a rethinking of how these reservoirs should be operated to allow small flood pulses to restore the ecosystem. It also have some flood management benefits to that. But of course, there would be, this is how we were going to reallocate this 10% that was going to be transferred from to irrigation to restoring the ecosystem. Now, in this process, one of the really significant advances that was made, I think, was bringing together some of the top academics to make sure that the planning process that the state and federal government was going through was a rigorous, accountable process, and through the adaptive management process. The next slide. And now, adaptive management has a lot of different interpretations, just like sustainability. But this is what CalFed ended up with. And I think it's a very simple process. And when you lay it out in a little box diagram like this, it seems obvious. But I think it's worth walking through here, and I can tell you what happened in this planning process. So the first thing is you define a problem. Okay, so the problem would be, say, 90% of the salmon that used to run in the rivers in California are gone. And there's a 10% that rely on fish hatcheries or trucking fish back to the ocean when they've hatched. A lot of unsustainable, very expensive processes to maintain their population. Next step is to establish goals and objectives. Well, goals are easy to say. Okay, restore the salmon population, and that's what goals are often what Greta Thunberg would call blah blah blah. It's really the objectives. When you state what your objectives are, that really the rubber meets the road. Making sure that the objectives of your management system are operationally logical. It translates your goals into operationally achievable objectives. So you don't say, oh, yes, restore the salmon fishery. You actually say, give a percentage recovery rate for a particular location that can be measured. Once you've done that, the next step is to develop a conceptual model of what the linkage is between, say, flood pulses and how the ecosystem responds. And actually, this is the interesting thing about this part of the process. Just simply establishing these cause and effect. If you're going to take away water from irrigation, which is a very, irrigated agriculture is the second most important economic activity in California. You've got to be sure that you can logically explain what you'll get, what benefits you think you're going to get from it by articulating these conceptual models. Actually, this is one of the interesting things is this is one of the places where scientists got in the way, because what tended to happen was when we dealt with each of these individual components of the ecosystem, we would assemble a group of scientists, say fisheries experts on salmon, ornithologists on birds, and we would ask them, well, what are the conceptual model that links flows and ecosystem response? And they would never agree because nobody had the big picture. They could never establish simple linkages between cause and effect because they would always be focused on their own little piece of a puzzle. They didn't have the big picture. So often what I would find myself doing is taking what the scientists did and then sort of re-articulating it into very simple cause and effect statements or little diagrams, just like we just saw, in that previous slide. So it's possible to overthink these conceptual models, but you do have to have a logic basis for your actions. Once you've got that, those conceptual models, you can start modeling the outcomes, possible scenarios. And one of the interesting things that we found when we got into this, because we were looking at reallocating water for fish and wildlife, we thought it would be a simple matter to take the operational models that were being used by the government water management agencies and just start building in some new algorithms that reflected our conceptual models. And much to our amazement, we found that there was no operational model for the whole system. When you dug into, even though they maintain, we're using state-of-the-art operational optimization, what we found was at certain points, decision points in the system operation, of how much water you can release from the dams, somebody had to pick up the phone and call their boss. And so there was no complete simulation of how you could manipulate a system. So one of the key things that we articulated was how important it was to have a transparent operational model so that anybody can look at it and use it and understand if they're advocating, changing an operation of a particular reservoir or reallocating some water from one place to another, what it actually meant in terms of water deliveries and the frequency of flow pulses and things like that. And I still don't, I'm out of it now, but I'm still not sure. The operational model that runs a system still doesn't have a point where somebody has to call their boss to get the approval to open up the gates in the reservoir. Now, one of the problems, once you've gone through these simulations, you should be able to select a particular approach. And one of the shortfalls that we found often happened was we got experts in the room, we defined the problem, people would immediately start linking, going straight to, we know the solution to that. They would go from here to here and skip all this objectives, conceptual models. And so often a lot of money was spent without really a clear rationale and without any accountability that the adaptive management cycle provides you. Because a key part of the adaptive management cycle is once you implement a policy, a different flow regime, for example, you should be able to monitor it, monitor the criteria that defines your objectives, and to see whether or not you're achieving your objectives. And if not, why not? And allow that to reevaluate, allow that monitoring to reevaluate how you adapt your conceptual models, your objectives, or even redefine the problem. And unfortunately, what we found too often is not much attention, very little attention was paid to this part of the adaptive management cycle. And of course, the whole idea of the adaptive management cycle is that it is the basic tool to use when you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. How to make rational, accountable decisions when you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty. The take-home message, that's the take-home message I don't believe you can achieve a sustainable resource management unless you do it using an adaptive management. And an adaptive management has to be accountable. And one of the problems we have in the United States is it's not clear who is in charge of the decision-making process. We have fragmentation in the different entities, the different agencies, different players influencing resource management. And of course, what tends to happen is the legacy of the old infrastructure has created a huge amount of wealth for certain interests in maintaining the status quo. And in California, the irrigated agriculture is so profitable that they can use, agribusiness can use its influence. In fact, it used to say, people used to say it ran the state government through what in some countries would be called bribery. In America, it's called campaign contributions to influence elections. But and they have no interest whatsoever in sustainability because, you know, to be quite frank, if they can squeeze a few more years of irrigation deliveries, it makes a lot of economic sense. Why constrain yourself when you can keep doing what you've been doing? So this effort failed for several reasons. I mean, for the influence of the interested parties who are interested only in maintaining the status quo because they profited from the initial investment in the infrastructure. And then we also had a loss of leadership when the federal government changed. Republicans took over federal government in 2000. So it's a sad story. But the problems have not gone away. We're still now suffering a drought, and the environment is still deteriorating. So that's my experience of trying to introduce sustainability in California water resources management.
Thank you, Phil. I think California is a fascinating story regarding water, and you know it very, very closely, I think. And let me ask you a little bit more about that, about the California experience. And I would like to take you to some of the more recent news about it, which is the water markets. So the idea of using derivatives in the market, in Wall Street, to somehow, this is what I think they are looking for, is to improve the management of the system. How do you see that?
Yeah, right now, in an ideal world, you know, if we could start all over again in California, would we have done it? Would we have built all those dams in a way? Wouldn't we have priced water and made investment decisions based on a more rational way? Yeah, well, yeah. The problem, I mean, there is potential in water market in California, and it has been used to alleviate problems. And most, 85% of the water that goes to irrigation, the 15% of it goes to urban or industrial uses. That 15% has actually been the beneficiary of some water marketing. I mean, so the cities are rich enough and powerful enough to enable some sort of way in some places to get to buy their water. So it's for cities that haven't been so badly off. So you can rest assured that Silicon Valley is still going to get its water, you know, and the city of Los Angeles is still going to get its water. What's losing water is agriculture, irrigated agriculture. And the problem with establishing a market is that is the archaic system of water rights that constrain who actually owns the value of water, an unresolved question about where the public trust, because originally water rights were given by the state, were given in perpetuity, but basically lent to the user to use in a beneficial way. But then with the power of money in politics, this has been interpreted as, well, we now own the water, so we can do what we like with it, and you can't tell us. So it's a very confused situation. There's no pure market of water. The interesting thing is, though, the place where a pure market in water is emerging is in recycled water. Because in the cities now, you know, have treatment plants that are now generating good quality water, and it's very clear who owns that water. And so there you actually see the market at work. But, you know, the basic problem is water is irrigated agriculture really pays. The price of water in California is so distorted. You cannot establish a clear market, and that's not to say it's not at the edges. You can use market forces.
Phil, you are giving us a view that has a lot to do with governance and institutions, and it came to my mind a very well-known movie, Chinatown.
You got it.
So, do you want to make a comment on that movie? I think it's a great.
Actually, you know, that Chinatown was a story of how the city of Los Angeles got its water supply by kind of nefarious, you know, sort of semi-legal ways, by acquiring the water rights to from farms up in the Owens Valley on the eastern side of the Sierra. Now, the interesting thing about that was they were successful. I mean, it actually created the San Fernando Valley. That was the water supply that allowed the development of huge areas in Los Angeles. The interesting thing was, actually, I was hired by Inyo County, Owens Valley, in the Owens Valley, to review the city of Los Angeles' second aqueduct. They put them under building a second aqueduct up into the Owens Valley. Instead of taking surface water, they were putting big groundwater pumps and filling this aqueduct. So I actually stepped into the shoes of the people who were in that movie, like 60 years later. And I found it was just as bribery and corruption. It's crazy. You can make a movie again about what happened.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I have at least three more big questions to have your views about, and let me take you to that. One of them is, how do you see climate change? I mean, how significant do you think this is as a topic, and what do you expect to be the consequences in the next, let's say, years or decades?
Yeah. Well, this is the big one, because all these, the water management system in California was built on the assumption of stationary climate. So all the statistical analyses and water deliveries and water contracts were based on that assumption. But nobody really wants to get to grips with how, when you start changing those frequencies, you start looking at what that actually means in terms of water deliveries. Instead, everybody's making a year-by-year decision. And then you can really see it in the Colorado River, what's happening on the Colorado River, where massive amount of development occurred in Arizona, suburban development mainly from the Central Arizona project, taking water out of the Colorado. And if you look at any sort of mid-range projections on how climate change would affect those water delivery, it's pretty dire. These are whole huge numbers of subdivisions that are going to run out of water. But we're kind of burying our head in the sand on these issues. The other thing is that all these issues were apparent before climate change. The water system was oversubscribed before climate change. And part of this was in building these water projects, for example, on the Colorado River, it was assumed that the water supply was probably 20% more, for the flows in the Colorado River, 20% more than they actually were. And this was actually known at the time. But they always sold the project because they wanted the political support for the project. So they oversold the project so they could get funding, so they could get water delivered to agriculture and subdivisions, knowing, behind the scenes, knowing that there was never enough water in the Colorado River. And that's the same story you see in California too. There's always over-optimism about how the system's going to perform. And this is why I'm saying, resilience is a really key part of sustainability, because unless you build in these assumptions of extended natural droughts, it hardly matters whether climate change is making bad situation worse.
It's very interesting. Now, if you go to, so to say, the potential solutions to it, and you live in San Francisco, let's say the Silicon Valley, at the edge of technological developments, do you see that, so to say, the Homo Deus, taking the title of the book by Yuval Harari, which is really using technology and big data and algorithms, artificial intelligence, is that going to be giving us a way to handle all of this and to improve it and to overcome, so to say, the challenge? How do you see the way of technology ahead?
Well, I think it's a micro level and a macro level. On a macro level, I think it's important to have operational models that are transparent and usable by all the interested parties. And that's, I think the resource management agencies have tended to be very protective of their models because they don't want people looking under the, looking at them, and because what you find are sometimes embedded algorithms that give preference to certain water users. And so you need to have that on the macro level. On the micro level, it is possible to, every time we have a drought, you get a water agency will say, cut back, we got to cut back on 20%, 30%, whatever. But most people, cities like Los Angeles, they actually do a pretty good job of cutting back urban water use. From often just simple landscaping, we have little technical solutions, and we have shower heads to reduce the supply, use of water. but one of the missing things, I think, is, and you see this in water and you see this in energy, is you don't have any sort of feedback mechanism that tells individual consumers how much water you're really using. So, you know, if I had a little dial, I should have a little dial somewhere in my house that says, today you used so much water, or today you used so much electricity. We don't have that. And I think there are places that are developed giving instant feedback to consumers. I think it could be an important tool, but I haven't seen it really implemented anywhere.
Great. And let me take you to some other dimension. I think you really were a pioneer by founding IRN, International River Networks, and this has a lot to do with NGOs, civil society actions, and probably a new way of governance ahead of us that is happening and shaping the agenda, so to say. So, can you share with us? Would you share with us some of your learning experiences regarding IRN?
Sure, yeah. Well, the International Rivers Network grew out of my experiences of working with environmental groups on California water issues and what was going on in the 1970s was, even though this water system was pretty much maxed out, the dam building was continuing, even though it didn't make any economic sense. There was a dam building agencies like the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, Corps of Engineers. They had access to vast amounts of public funds, and they were just running out of good dam sites. So they would propose absurd new mega dams, which would destroy environmental resources. So when we started looking at that, we realized the economic case, there's a marginal economic, when you have a water development system, the first few dams can be very profitable. After you start adding more, they become less and less profitable. We found the economic case just didn't make any sense. So we, started challenging all these assumptions. When I was doing that, I started reading the engineering press, and I was finding the same companies and same interests were going to other countries, promoting California as a role model for how other countries should develop. And without telling them the bad news of all the problems that we were dealing with, particularly in terms of wasting of money. And so we got in contact with different organizations in different countries, other NGOs, and we realized that there came a point where we can see that we all had a common interest, and we were bringing up these same concerns about these mega projects. And what our focus was on targeting the funding of these projects. So we actually spent a lot of time lobbying the World Bank or Interdevelopment American Bank to get them to see that these were not development projects. These were just ways of churning money often into a corrupt system. But yeah, it was quite an experience. I mean, we had an impact for a while, but I can't say, I mean, the dam building era is still going on. I spent a lot of time trying to help Chinese engineers and environmentalists who were opposing the Three Gorges Dam, and we didn't win that one.
And Phil, how do you see the role of the NGOs from now on?
There's different types of NGOs. I've had experience working with organizations like the Environmental Defense Fund, Natural Resource Defense Council in the United States, pretty sophisticated. They operate on, I guess their model is advocacy science. And this is where I would put, in other words, bringing in good scientists or experts to critique the status quo, to come up with better solutions for the environment. So wearing my sort of PhD hat and my engineering training, I think I was unusual in very few engineers working in that kind of environment. But then also there are activist groups who are mobilizing local people and mobilizing public awareness about these projects and the impacts. There's a lot of work, for example, in Brazil on the dams in the rainforest and the adverse effects they were going to have. And again, they put up a pretty good fight, but the Shingo projects went ahead and just as we were saying, it's a bit of a disaster.
Phil, I want to take you to one last and final area, which is the role of engineering, and in particular, the role and the way engineering is changing or maybe changing in the future, including the environment and issues like nature-based ideas and solutions and approaches. And how do you see the role of engineering in the future?
Well, it's interesting. I guess in my engineering training, that was back in the 60s and early 70s, and there was no consideration given to the kind of issues that confront, that guide engineering decisions now, the social and environmental effects. I think the positive thing is a much greater awareness of that. And also, at least I see with the British engineering institutions, a strong emphasis on the collaboration, on how you actually get decisions made in a collaborative way. How do you really the adaptive management approach? How do you so that's very encouraging, and all we were concerned about in our engineering training was equations. The social element wasn't there, but I think now that I am actually pretty encouraged at how that is now being integrated, because often it's kind of interesting. The thing about engineering is it's problem solving. And often I would find myself in a situation where for example, an environmental restoration project where they were very well qualified biologists and landscape architects, but people tended to gravitate to me to help them make decisions, simply because I think an engineer looks at a problem, looks at these ways of solving problems, whereas pure scientists don't do it. Academics certainly can get in the way because they emphasize what you don't know rather than what you do know. So the whole process, I think there's a quite encouraging move towards understanding a larger role for engineers as problem solvers and managers, and giving the skill sets in the educational system that can help them do it.
That is great, Phil. Thank you very much. I'm really glad that you have accepted to become an honorary fellow. Don't doubt we will be having you into account and also maybe reaching out to you for advices or for ideas, or even to include you in some of our endeavors, and feel free to do the same with our institution. And once again, let me close, at least from my side, saying that it is a real honor for our institution to be including you in this category, which is a real top level group of people that we know that we can count on. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I'm honored too.